Hello and welcome to another episode on the Everyday Joy podcast. Before we dive into the podcast, if you are new, a couple of things I just want to say to you. Number one, welcome. Thank you so much for choosing to be a part of this podcast. Each episode ranges between 10 and 15 minutes. Sometimes we go for a bit longer, but it's always good stuff. Now, every episode has the same 3 questions. So if you like, you can follow along and answer these questions yourself before you listen to the episode. Then you can listen into the episode and get more out of it. Here are the 3 questions. Number 1, what is your first impression of this verse? Number 2, what does this verse tell you about who God is or what matters to him? And lastly, how has this verse come alive in your everyday life? These are 3 questions that you can find in some way, shape, or form in every episode. And that means you can expect some great conversation with practical points, as well as stories that I know you will resonate with. Right now, though, let's get into today's Bible verse.
Let the peace that comes from Jesus rule in your hearts. You are called to live in peace and always be thankful. Colossians 3:15 from the NLT version of the Bible.
Wrapping up the week, I have Jackie here with me. Hello, Jack.
Oh, hey, Joy, what a week.
Oh my goodness, we've talked about Sabbath. We have talked about watching your thoughts, watching your mouth. We have talked about the power of surrender and worship during difficult times. My goodness, we've covered so many different topics. So make sure you go back and listen to all the episodes this week. And you can go back, there's a lot of episodes.
There's a lot of episodes now, Joy.
So there's lots of good stuff. Today, focusing on Colossians 3:15. This is in the New Testament. It's one of the letters written to the early churches, instructing them to live and behave in a certain way as they are representatives of who Jesus is and what he represents. So a really beautiful verse that talks about peace in a time where things weren't peaceful. These Christians, these baby Christians, were being persecuted left, right, and center. And yet this verse says, let the peace that comes from Jesus rule in your hearts. You are called to live in peace and always be thankful. It's a beautiful verse, and I think for me the first thing that jumps out is that it's peace that comes from Jesus.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And peace in this context doesn't mean, not being at war or not living in a peaceful situation, but in knowing Jesus. So it's in having that strong faith, in putting all your trust in him absolutely and unequivocally, that, that's where that peace comes from. I know we've spoken before about that base of knowing God, of your faith being immovable. And I think that's the peace that the Bible's referring to. Yeah. It's also the OG gratitude statement, isn't it? Always be thankful. And it's such a thing now. It's such a thing to, you have to have a gratitude journal and think about all these things. But like you said, this verse takes it to, puts the Jesus spin on that.
Yeah. I think when it comes to gratitude, it only goes so far without Jesus. For me anyway, in terms of my faith. I can think of a lot of things to be thankful for, sure. But I think when I am thankful for what Jesus has given me, I feel like that's the game changer.
Absolutely.
Really changes things for me.
Because then, preempting your next question, what it tells me about God is that he's given us this peace through Jesus, that no matter what's going on in our lives and our world, we can live in peace, and in a practical way too, which is, to always be thankful. And we can be thankful that we have access to God through Jesus, that he stepped into that gap of sin for us and sacrificed his life so we could have eternity with a loving and peace-giving God.
Mm-hmm.
What a sacrifice, and it is the basis of our faith.
And it's like this gift that's given to you, but you've got to be the one to unwrap it.
Yes.
It's yours. It's got your name on it. It's there for you. That peace is yours. And sometimes we've got to be the ones to take that next step in receiving it and accepting what Jesus has done on the cross and taking those next steps.
Yeah.
So, Jackie, does this verse tell you about God, and how has this come alive in your world?
Yeah. That definitely that it's through Jesus that we get this peace, this, non-worldly, really doesn't make much sense kind of peace. That, we can be thankful for every blessing and circumstance, thankful that every obstacle or hardship gives us an opportunity to push into God, to get to know him a bit more and build our faith. Not because he caused us pain or difficulties, but because of them, in spite of them, we can deepen our relationship with him. Yeah. And I had an experience, and this is going probably a bit deeper than we normally do, Joy, but I had an experience. My mum was in hospital. She had, end stage cancer. She was passing away. I was unsaved at the time, and I was staying in the hospital room. I was with her all the time. She was non-communicative by that stage, and we were waiting for the end, basically. And I had a book that she had actually given me that was all about, facing the end. And I was reading it, and I was talking to her, and I was really at a bit of a loss as to how to approach that and how to speak to her in that situation, and what I could say to myself. And really what I ended up saying to her was basically, I've got this, Mum. It's okay. Like, if you need to go, that if it's time, that's fine. I've got this. I can, look after whatever's there is to look after. I can make sure this is done. I can make sure this is done. I can, do this. And at that point, I didn't have didn't have a faith. And the chaplain from the hospital came into the room, and she said, "Do you mind if I sit and just pray with you, Mum, for a minute?" And she sat, and she would have only been there for maybe 3 or 4 minutes. And she sat with my mum, and right by her while she was on the bed, and she held her hand, and she said, and she prayed with her, and she said, "And you know what? God's got it. God's got everything. God's got your daughter. God's got your son. God's got your grandchildren." And it wasn't long. I mean, I can't really remember, but it was probably only an hour after that my mum actually passed away. And I just remember this feeling of being so grateful for being so peaceful when she did, because of these words that were of God, and were of the goodness of God and the protection of God over me and my family, and being so peaceful in that moment, and not even knowing God, and being able to look back on it once I, became a Christian and knew what those words meant, and just think, how good is God in that moment? How good is he to sit with me, in that moment, and let me know that it's not just on me. It's not, he's got it. He's bigger. It's part of, who he is.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, God bless that chaplain.
Oh, I cannot remember her name. I've got a little visual, but yes, bless her.
Yeah. And I think thank you for sharing that story, Jackie, because I think there's so many beautiful moments in that at a time where it was really painful, where there was a lot of hardship. And that's the context of this verse as well. This was written to people who had lost family members, who were struggling and who were going through some really difficult times, and they did not know the future. Yeah. I think that's the scariest thing for all of us. It's when you don't know what you're going to do. Yeah. And you don't know how it's all going to come together. Yeah. And you just don't know who's going to look after your kids and who's going to look after this and how you're going to manage that. Yeah. And you can get so overwhelmed with all of that. And what I love that the chaplain said to both you and your mum in that moment is that God's got this. Yeah. And you can be at peace because of who God is and how much he loves you. And for you listening, I hope that you can take that with you in whatever situation you're facing, because the same peace that came over your mum in those moments and the same peace that came over you and the same peace that has come over me in times of deep distress is the same peace that's held out to you. that God is there for you. And even though you don't know all the answers and you don't know what's next, God's got this and He's got you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, we have come to the end of today's episode. I'd highly encourage you to check out 2 things. Number 1, head to the Everyday Joy Facebook group where you can find an extended conversation, a reflection, a thought, or even just an incredible community who want to dive into the scripture further. Now, if you don't see a post on there, share a bit of your story. That's what the community is for. The link to that is in the description below. Today's episode honestly could not be possible without so many incredible thoughts and ideas and stories from real live people. And I hope that as you listen to today's episode, you can be reminded that in the same way God works in our stories and in our lives, He can work in your life as well. He is a God who cares about you and who loves you and who is there for you. I hope you feel the love today, and I hope you can head out into whatever situation you're facing with more courage, with more strength, and of course, more joy. Look forward to catching up again next time.